Welcome to part 2 of the post-election analysis of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and with us tonight we have Merrick Moses, Daniel Thomas, and Mike Bernard. The media's analysis prior to the election of the campaigns before the actual election used polls as their primary benchmark. How do you think the polling worked in predicting the outcome of these midterms? Mike, what do you think about what the polls were saying and what actually happened on election day?
I get the impression that hoping the media is a little more cautious in using polls given the results of the last couple of elections. That said, what I've been hearing on news analysis is that there were a couple of surprises as to what drove people to the polls, where the big thing was, inflation, economy, the rest of it doesn't mean doodly. Well, guess what? Women's health meant a whole lot more than what the polls apparently suggested. And personally, I'm happy about that. But yeah, I don't know. Polls, they're interesting, but I don't know how well they really predict. And this time around, maybe a little better than the last couple times, but even then, I think I just learned myself from the last couple of elections. Well, polls are interesting, however, grain of salt, grain of salt.
Merrick, how do you think the polls played out this particular midterm?
The polls are trash.
There you go. I'm with you there, brother.
They're trash, and I'm gonna tell you why from an on-the-ground standpoint. If I've ever gotten somebody to call me on a poll about a poll, it might be the NAACP, Publishers Clearinghouse, or the ACLU. Other than that, nobody calls me. And I asked other friends of mine, educated Black folk, do they call you? Nobody calls me. So I don't know who they're calling, but the polls are trash, and they only capture a snapshot in time. They are not predictive of human behavior at all.
Dan, what's your take on the polls and this particular midterm?
Polls are for people who answer their landline phones and literally no one else. So, yeah, no one under 30 ever answers a poll because they don't have a landline phone. And I think if you're under 50, you don't answer an unknown number. If it's important, they'll send you a text. So, yeah, polls are ridiculous. I've been listening to the 538 podcast a lot, Nate Silver's, where they basically predict outcomes based on modeling. And for the past 5 years, polls have been less and less and less important in their modeling. They're looking more at historical trends, like party in power to lose seats in the House. And when there's something that happens, there will be a response from the voters. So when elections happen, in comparison to current events, that kind of thing. But they are not even bothering to factor in their polls or to factor polls in as a high weight variable anymore because nobody answers them. And even when you get the polls, like I have received phone calls. I'm a white person. That's probably got something to do with why they're polling me. And I only answered the phone because I was waiting for a call from a doctor. And that's why I bothered to answer an unknown number. But the poll questions are extremely skewed whenever you do take them. Like to use an election law passed that can't be changed. How do you feel about Hillary Clinton tearing the head off a baby and eating it like an apple? Well, I guess I'm against it. Okay, this is a Republican-leaning poll. Like, yeah, I'm not joking about the questions being like that. Did you know that your local mayor wants to open an abortion clinic where there's an adoption center for unwanted puppies and kittens? It's all skewed in a way to get you the answer that the pollster wants. So what's the point? So, and I have answered the pollster questions in the that's just not true. So your answer is it's not true, or tell them I'm in favor of it. It's fine. I'll tear the head off the baby and eat it myself. It's okay. But polls are a thing of the past. unless you're going to figure out how to take polling on TikTok, which actually probably wouldn't be that difficult. You're you're not going to get a representative section of people answering, so your numbers are going to be highly skewed. If I walk into a Republican convention and ask poll questions about a Democratic candidate, I'm not going to get good answers. I could ask them about a Republican candidate and get better answers. But yeah, I have to physically go there, be charismatic enough for people to talk to me on the ground. Yeah, that's not done anymore. So the polls are worthless.
Polls are worthless. I'm agreeing with that. I got a ton of emails before the election from candidates from across the country. Val Demings, Tim Ryan, Mandela Barnes, Sherry Beasley, just to name a few, as well as celebrities such as Martin Sheen, Carole King, Franco Harris, etc., promoting the candidacies of John Fetterman and Josh Shapiro. I didn't get anything from Kanye West promoting Doug Mastriano, so I'm guessing my profile algorithm filters must be working rather well. How much effect do you think celebrity influences like Martin Sheen, Kanye West, Barack Obama, or Donald Trump had on these races? Merrick, I'm going to let you start on this one.
Well, I think that a celebrity like Barack Obama does make a difference in that when he's still much beloved in many parts of the country. So he can drive out, he can drive a turnout, particularly for independents who may be on the fence. But I think that the right has their cast of weirdos that they parade out to turn out the vote. But like regular old celebrity like Martin Sheen, I don't really care about that. Um, and some of the other folks that they paraded out, I really don't care about that. And I do know that for some young people, they think it's just a con anyway. So they don't. So some young people are not motivated by that. But I do think that when you have a celebrity that's advocating for a specific position, that may be a way to get people out. Like for instance, I would love to see some type of coronational uh, information or data around uh, um, Taylor Swift and her "I Will Vote," whatever she was doing that I saw, and I feel like she's also pro-choice. How many young women looked at that in her demographic and was like, "I'm voting with her." You know what I'm saying? I think when folks are issue driven, that's different than candidate driven. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Dan, do you think these celebrities had any influence on anyone's voting?
Well, Kanye didn't have time to email you because he was too busy stalking his ex-wife and trying to convince people to start a second Holocaust. So he was occupied at the time. But yes, I do think celebrities do have an impact on it, and I agree with Merrick. Obama, and to a similar extent, Trump do have an influence, both as former presidents. They carry some authority when they speak, like, we know what we're doing. In one of those cases, it's true. Um, the other celebrities, like we can use Taylor Swift as an example, because when she was very famously apolitical for a long time, and then she she became very liberal and came out swinging, living in a part of the country that is pretty red. But the nasty comment that I heard made to one of the people who told her to stay in her lane was, all those 13-year-olds who she wrote 1989 for, they are all 18 now and they can vote. Now, her advocacy, the candidates she backed did not win when she started, but she was fighting to turn Tennessee blue. That's a that's a pretty tall order from somebody that's not her full-time job. But I do think that there is influence there because there's an audience that the regular politician is not going to reach. Like there's a reason that Nancy Pelosi had a guest appearance on Drag Race, It was cringy as hell. It was awful and embarrassing, but she did it because she was trying to reach a particular audience that she couldn't necessarily do as the Speaker of the House and get more votes.
I cringe
So
just at the thought
there
of
there
that.
is value to this. Oh, it was so bad, and the drag queens pretending that they knew who she was. That was even worse. But yeah, it was really. They're smart, but they're not that kind of smart. It was really, but there is value to that kind of endorsement. Unfortunately, accepting that kind of endorsement also opens the door to whatever kind of baggage that celebrity brings. Like Oprah came out endorsing Dr. Oz or endorsing John Fetterman against Dr. Oz. She didn't say anything bad about Dr. Oz because she created him. She's 100% responsible for him. She's created a whole lot of other quacks and terrible, terrible social norms. I cannot. The damage Oprah Winfrey has done to our society is just huge. And she came out against one of her creations. Cool, good for her. But that was where it ended. John Fetterman did not want Oprah's baggage. She did not want to give her baggage to John Fetterman, but she told her audience why she liked Fetterman. And that mattered because that reached people that Fetterman probably couldn't get.
Okay, brought out. We just talked about Taylor Swift, Barack Obama, and Oprah Winfrey. Mike, those are pretty influential people.
Yeah.
Do you think they had an effect on or anyone else?
I think it depends on the celebrity, like everyone's been talking about. So for people who are in the business, like Barack Obama and yeah, that guy, yeah, definitely. I'm sure they had some people who listened and hopefully either they probably got to people that already agreed with their messages and hopefully just got them out to vote, at least for Democrats. But I'm seeing, I saw it before and recently where in some Democratic races, depending on the situation, sometimes they wanted Joe Biden to be involved. Sometimes they wanted him to back off and be away because they would consider him a potential liability based on what people thought of him in that area. And I'm even hearing it now where the Republicans are asking you know who to delay his potential announcement about running till after the Georgia Senate runoff instead of doing it tomorrow. Will it happen? Who knows? So it's interesting just to see that actually still playing out.
Okay, let's talk about the new Congress here. At this moment, we don't know how the House is gonna shake out, but we do know that the Democrats have 50 Senate votes. They could have 51. 50 is enough because they have the vice president who's going to vote for their caucus. So Chuck Schumer is now the new or continues to remain as majority leader in the Senate. So how do you think all that's going to play out? Mike, I'm going to start with you. How do you see this new Congress working in this next 2-year term?
I'm not super hopeful that a lot will get done. I just thought of a couple of specific issues. I thought about immigration. Probably not much will happen just because there's such a close split between in both places. I wrote down earlier like LGBTQ rights. There's that marriage bill that apparently is going to be looked at this week. I wasn't sure that was even going to be addressed, but who knows? We'll see. Health and women's choice. I think even if there was a narrow majority in House for the Republicans, anything they try to do against women's health and women's choice, they're going to be quickly vetoed, and there wouldn't be enough votes to override it. And the usual thing, Republicans, I still view the Republicans as the party of no. Well, anything they can do to block things being done by the Democrats, even if it's good for the country and for the constituents, that's going to continue. Whether they have a majority of 2 people in the House, whether they have 30, a majority of 30, or even if they have a minority, they're going to do everything they can to block.
Okay, Dan. Mike says no or close to nothing. So what do you think?
Um, I, I think what I said before still stands. They're going to fill judicial openings in the Senate. They are going to get agency heads confirmed, and that will be the extent of it. Oh, and they will also be able to, I just learned this today. If we have a 50-50 Senate, you need special permission to take something out of committee because there's an equal number of Democrats and Republicans on every committee. So things just languish there until the Senate takes a vote to move things forward. If you have a 51-49 Senate, you don't need that. The Democrats in the committee will just vote to move things out of committee. I don't know what they're going to be moving out of committee because they're not going to have any bills from the House, and any bills that they send to the House are just going to die there. I do think that, assuming that it's Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, he's going to have a rather difficult time wrangling his caucus. It's not going to be as easy for him as it was for Nancy Pelosi because they are his most hardline extreme people are really, really far out there. And he won't be, the majority will be so narrow that he won't be able to lose more than 2 or 3 votes for anything that he wants to do. And I think he's going to have to go across the hall and ask Nancy for help on pretty much anything he wants to accomplish. And I think she's going to wring concessions out of him in order to give that help and get anything done. He's not going to want to give a lot of concessions, so probably not a lot is going to go get moved through the House at all. But we'll see. I mean, theoretically, we could pick up those 14 or however many more seats we need. I don't think that that's going to happen.
If it does happen, I think possibly quite a bit could get done. Actually, well, not really, because you said the
if it happens, yeah, I think that if we had 52, well, it doesn't matter that we don't have 52 Democratic senators because we won't have anything to break the filibuster for.
right.
But if we kept the House, we needed 52 in order to get rid of people who sexually fetishize the filibuster. Like there's 2 in Congress that we know of, but there could be more. But 2 went on record saying no, die on that hill to protect it.
Merrick, Dan brings up a good point about judicial appointments and cabinet agency appointments that need to be confirmed by the Senate. But as far as I see it, that's about all that's going to happen the second term. You see anything different?
Nope, I see a big stalemate. I see a lot of shenanigans and BS from the Maggot caucus. I wonder if MTG will have any committees. Will it be like the Chippendales committee, or how do we smuggle drugs into the house for Matt Gates committee? Who knows? But I will say that the nuts will be running the asylum. I don't care if McCarthy is speaker or not. He has no control over anybody. He can barely control himself. And if I was Nancy Pelosi, every time I met with him, I would at least have 5 big bodyguards with me since he's threatening to hit her over the head with the gavel. I would be because I'm that person. I'm very petty, so I am that person. And because she's from Baltimore, I know that there's pettiness in her. She's sent out little flickers. Okay, she sent out little stuff.
We all saw her clapping.
Yes, that came right out of Little Italy, and it came right out of Pratt Street, right there. You know what I'm saying? So she is petty, but I am not petty. I would be that person that would be like, try it now. So there's nothing going to get done, and I really feel like McCarthy is how could I say? I think he's feckless. I think he'll have no control of his caucus. And they're talking now, the so-called Freedom Caucus, or as I like to say, the Klan Caucus is now talking about voting for Trump as Speaker. So that should be interesting.
Yeah, I can see Democrats voting for that. Do you believe the attack on Paul Pelosi by a QAnon-inspired nut job swayed any votes one way or the other. And what does that conclusion tell you about the mindset of the American electorate? On election day, I'm a poll worker. And so one of our new poll workers there, I told her about this podcast and I told her about this specific question. Do you think anybody, will take that attack and actually vote the other way, away from the MAGA, because of what happened there? And she said yes. She thought people would, and so I'll throw that out, Merrick. You think any votes were swayed by that attack on Paul Pelosi?
Maybe for some people that were like really sitting on the fence. But what I see is that suburban mom thinking about her father or her grandfather being attacked by some nut job because of who he is married to, or the people that are just like, this is enough. I've had enough. I'm done with these people. Like that was the nail in the coffin. They were leaning towards the Dems anyway, but that was the nail in the coffin. Particularly the behavior after the attack, the laughing, Trump calling Pelosi an animal, gay rumors. People were like, okay, you guys are really just POSs, because this is an old man. Okay, like we can put politics aside and be like, that's crazy and that's scary, and as someone who lives in Baltimore City and has been to a site in which an elder was killed by a very sick individual over nothing, I found it completely egregious and reprehensible, and it shows that they're really not Christians. In fact, they probably are Satanists. That's how I look at it, because there's nothing funny about that.
Dan, do you think anybody was on the fence before the attack enough to have their votes swayed by the attack?
Well, I believe I already said that I don't understand the mindset of people who are on the fence, but I think that I think that there are people who saw that, looked at that, and thought, I can't be associated with this party and these people. And there was a lot of immediate attempt to justify, like, oh, that guy was sick, oh, he was crazy, to make it not the fault of the rhetoric. There was a big attempt to do that, but I don't think it worked. I mean, I very loudly do not like a lot of Republican politicians and President Trump, and I'm very, very against these things or these people. So if I happen to go and vandalize Mike Kelly's house, it would be very hard for anybody to come up with a reason why I would do that wasn't politically motivated, because I'm damaging the property of a Republican congressman. And that hurts my side. It's like those climate activists who keep on throwing soup at famous paintings. You're hurting your own cause. I am a climate activist. I believe that that's very important. I think that my nieces are going to grow up in a very different world than I did because of climate change, and I would like to try to stop that, please. But if I use the tactics that I use to do that matter, and it might not be fast enough for some people, and it might not be fast enough for the planet. So I get kind of why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. But I don't think that other people are going to sit back and watch things like this happen and say, oh yeah, they're making a really good point. And I think that was the Paul Pelosi attack. I don't think that the kid who did it really had a whole lot of thinking going on. He wanted to break Nancy's legs and have her go in front of Congress in a wheelchair. I think that was his ultimate motivation. I do think that a lot of people who weren't necessarily that politically engaged did have to look and say, I can't be a party to the party that encourages this.
Any votes swayed by the Pelosi attack, Mike?
maybe a little bit, but I think the fact that so few people are on the fence, maybe some of those people, but in sheer numbers, no. But I bet what might have swayed some people more is just the way that some Republicans acted and some of the parodies they put out there, like on their Twitter feeds and their other social media, where uh, this one Republican candidate, I think was from Ohio, and his wife, their Halloween costume was um, Paul Pelosi, with the damaged head, and the wife or whatever was with him held a hammer. I mean, that was their Halloween costume, and that disgusted me more than anything else. The fact that these people, mostly Republicans, it feels like, were just making fun of the situation instead of expressing their sympathies and saying, what can we do to help? And yeah. So if I were on the fence, I'd be like, you people stay away from me.
Do you have any reason to believe that the threat of violence intimidated enough voters to actually impact any of the races? Merrick earlier alluded to Arizona, how scared he was about that. But Mike, do you think that any races were affected by the threat of violence?
Probably not much. I'd like to think that people take a look at that and said, watch me vote. I'll see you there. And they don't even try.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
Yeah. Dan, how about you?
Yes, I think that's why Arizona had all of their ballots dropped off on election day because people were afraid to drop them off with the armed gunmen standing outside of their poll boxes or of their drop off boxes.
But they still dropped them
So
off
yeah,
on election day, right? They still dropped them off on election day.
yes, they did. But they could have dropped them off way earlier, and this year really bucked a trend for Arizona's electoral politics because Arizona has been a vote by mail state for a long time. It's very unusual for that many to have been dropped off, at least according to 538 and Pod Save America and Strict Scrutiny and all the other political podcasts I listen to because I'm a political junkie.
So, do you think anybody who had planned to drop them off did not drop them off, did not vote at all because of the threat?
I think. Well, I'm sure there are some. Yes. Okay. When it is a risk to your life and livelihood, like I don't have any kids, I can go and deal with the armed insurrectionists at my polling place, or watching me drop a ballot in a box. But if you have a small child, especially if you're a single parent and you're that child's only livelihood, you don't want to take that risk. Why would you? You could be shot and then your kid has nothing and no one. So yeah, I think that absolutely these politics are deliberately there for voter intimidation. The people who are not afraid of them are the people who are voting in the direction that they want anyway. Like Trump said, they're not here to hurt me. Take down the metal detectors.
Merrick?
Political violence. I think that for me, political violence also looks like showing up at these polling places and these drop boxes with guns. And although there were no shots fired, that's still a form of violence. What would be the purpose of that? If you ask them, they're protecting the ballot box from what? You're not like it's just all so stupid. It's for little member people that need to show themselves off. This is why they walk around with all these guns. It's very sick people, very sick people. That being said, I don't think we've seen the last of any type of election. Political violence. Were people afraid? I think people were afraid, but I also thought that people were angry that people were being intimidated and made it a point to show up. Also,
that motivated some voters. Yeah,
it did motivate some people. Like, you're not going to intimidate me. And I think that we also need a caveat here is another thing that the mainstream media doesn't talk about. What we need to talk about is why does the Republican Party have its own militias? Let's not say, oh, they try to separate the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers as kind of just like entities on their own that espouse right wing ideology. No, they are part and parcel of the Republican apparatus. Trump basically baptized them into that unholy alliance. And anytime you have a political party that has its own militia, that's never good. That's never good. And the Republicans need to be they need to be told, are you going to keep palling around with these militias? Is this your militia? I'm not. That's the answer I want to know. Like, is this y'all private army? And if it is, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, you cross the line and actuate violence, you go to jail. That's what has to happen. Okay, there were referenda on abortion rights, on the constitutions of Kentucky, Michigan, California, Montana, and Vermont. And we all know how they turned out, right? Abortion rights were protected in every one of those referenda. What do you say about how those results should guide Democratic strategies for future elections? Merrick, I say, duh. This is what you got to do, for crying out loud. Look at what happened in Michigan. Look at how they swept in Michigan, and they rode the coattails of that referenda. So what's your take on that?
The Dems need to stop being scared and pass legislation enshrining Roe v. Wade into law. Period, point blank. If we do get this majority in the House by the slim graces of the universe, then that needs to be on the table. It needs to be on Biden's desk, if not before the end of this session, the next session. That needs to be bill number 1. We have to enshrine Roe v. Wade into law, because it's really about personal autonomy, bodily autonomy.
Do you think they would have? You think they would have the guts not to pass that after this election, after the results of this election?
Yes, I do think they would. I do think they would have the guts not to do it, because Barack Obama did the same thing. He said he was going to enshrine Roe v. Wade, and then he didn't enshrine Roe v. Wade, because you remember in his first term, he put all his eggs in the healthcare basket.
Right.
So there was all the capital had been spent. But I believe that if he had enshrined Roe v. Wade then, a lot of what happened in his presidency probably would have been easier.
But yeah. Okay, Dan, what's this tell you about the way the Democrats should plan on their future elections after those referenda passed overwhelmingly in even like Montana and Kentucky?
Well, I want to say that this is not the first time a Democratic ideal has passed based on a referenda when the Democratic candidate representing that ideal has lost in an area. And I have concerns about that. Like we saw that with marijuana legalization referendums in very red states before. Democrats have been pushing this, and yet the Democrat pushing it loses the election, but the referendum passes because the people do in fact want it. So it seems to me that the people want the Democratic idea, but they don't necessarily want the Democrat. Now, there can be a lot of different reasons for that, but at the end of the day, that's problematic. If the messenger is so abhorrent to the people receiving the message, but they still want it, then how do you really come back from that? I don't think I have an answer. But I do think that we should be, and when I say we, I mean all registered Democrats and all Democratic candidates should be saying, we want criminal justice reform, and this is what we want to do. It can't just be a slogan, but it can't be so complicated that you bore people because boring people doesn't work. That's how Trump beat Clinton. She was boring because she had concrete policy ideas. Joe Biden was better at just throwing a few slogans, but he also had policy ideas to back himself up.
Okay, Mike, do you think the Democrats should utilize the strategy of promoting abortion rights in the future?
Oh, totally, yeah. And the reason why is the Supreme Court gutted the concept of settled law when they got rid of Roe v. Wade. And so various rights that have been enshrined in recent times, you heard Justice Thomas saying, oh, we should go after marriage, you should go after, I forget the other ones, a right to privacy.
Contraception.
Contraception, right to privacy.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so, I think if it can't be done in the House and Senate, then referenda, hey, 65% in Maryland voted for legalization of cannabis. So, absolutely, it's a tool that seems to work.
Okay, last question, guys. Another interesting referendum occurred in South Dakota, where voters passed a ballot measure to include Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Many Republican-controlled states refused to allow low-income residents health care via Medicaid expansion because the name Obamacare was too toxic to permit in their states. Could the vehicle of initiative and referendum be another way to get more uninsured Americans access to health care, as demonstrated by the electorate in South Dakota? Mike, do you think other states should follow this model that occurred in South Dakota?
I don't think it could hurt. The reason I say that is it's certainly possible. If it could be done in South Dakota, it might be able to be done in other states. The thing is, though, you have to educate the public. And you have to get past the toxic messages that the Republican Party is going to put out there saying how terrible, awful this is going to be if you do this, and to be able to say, well, this is how it's going to benefit you. So the more education that you can get out there, the more voter registration that can occur. I think, yeah, it definitely could work.
Well, don't you think the idea of Obamacare has really survived the test of time since the Republicans have they trashed it and made their big midterm win in 2010 over that particular, what you said, demonstrating the how horrible Obamacare was, socialized medicine, all that. But since that time, Obamacare has really become a very popular thing in America, just like abortion rights have become very popular. So I think that education has already occurred. Merrick, what do you think about the possibility of expanding? And we're talking about places like Mississippi, Louisiana, where the Republicans have not allowed Medicaid expansion, and you have like the sickest people in the country down there.
Plus, you have athletes like Brett Favre stealing from millions of poor people in Mississippi to build his daughter a volleyball gym. But I digress. I think that it is a brilliant legislative strategy. However, we also have to be in mind who's writing these referenda, right? And in addition to that, sometimes because of the slimy things that the maggots do, they word things in the language of the referendum that confuses people on purpose. So although I do think this is a very bold and innovative legislative strategy, I would just caution that when the language is drafted, that people, the Dems and the Republicans, are in the room when those referenda are written, because we know that they play tricks. And also too, in the same states you named, people have a propensity for low literacy, right? So that's just another way to deter people from voting, writing these long paragraphs, right? And then you expect everybody to read them, and you know that people only have a fifth grade education. So that's something. Then that means that other people have to get mobilized to make sure people know what's going on. But that being said, I do think it is a start in the right direction.
To that point, There was a referenda on the Allegheny County ballot where I was a poll worker, and there were probably at least 15 to 20 people who said, "What does this mean?" And I had to explain to them what it was the board of the Allegheny County Council were oversaw the elections, were not allowed to run for any other office because there was supposedly a conflict of interest. And so the referenda suggested that they do be allowed to run for office like any other politician that could run for any other office. So I had to give that explanation like 20 times to the people there. And I think pretty much everybody voted for it after that. Okay, Dan, do you see now? Let me also mention about what the point Merrick brought out about the people that write these referenda. They actually put together a petition, and they have to get an enormous number of signatures in order to get these petitions. So you're absolutely right, Merrick, that they have to be very carefully written because they need to be understandable. Unlike the referenda that occurred in Allegheny County that I had to explain. So, Dan, what do you say about all that?
Um, well, I want to make a point of clarification about the term Obamacare. That was a nickname that Republicans gave to the Affordable Health Care Act in an attempt to make it toxic.
Right.
And much like Joe Biden has just embraced his role as Dark Brandon, Obama leaned into it. I hate the term. I think it is deeply rooted in racism. But if Barack Obama himself can say, all right, you want to call it Obamacare? I'll give you care and take it in. I have to go along with it. The use of referenda is a useful tool, but I think it's got to be done in limited quantities. Otherwise, we're just going to see ballots that are entirely list of referenda and voter turnout is low enough. No one is going to read all of that. And the referendas themselves are like a law is not you can bear arms. Like we'll use the Second Amendment. You have the right to bear arms. It shall not be abridged. Yada yada yada. But the statutes that are derived from that law are encyclopedia volumes of things to be interpreted. So you can legalize marijuana with a referendum, but what are the specifics? How do you know it? Is it still going to be considered a controlled substance? Is it going to become like alcohol? If you live in Ohio and you can buy your vodka at the grocery store, can you buy your marijuana there now? Or do you live in Pennsylvania where you have to go to a specific store in order to purchase this product? And is that store privately run or is it run by the state? And who gets the money in? Do you tax it? All of these questions cannot be answered on the referendum, which is going to be written to close legal loopholes, but also sometimes intentionally, sometimes not, will be potentially very confusing to the average person reading it, especially if the first time they're faced with it is when they walk into a voting booth. I mean, I've walked in during elections, and I consider myself to be a pretty high information voter, where I did not necessarily know there was going to be a referendum on the ballot. I think the last one I saw was about mandatory retirement age for Pennsylvania Supreme Court justices. I think that was 3 or 4 cycles ago. And I had to read it in the voting booth about 4 times before I understood what it said. And then I voted. I think I voted to give them a mandatory retirement age. But I was not expecting that. I did not know it was going to be there. I had not done research on it. And I'm a high information voter. So, what's the low information voter going to do when he or she sees that? They're going to skip it or they're going to vote at random. Like, I do think that this is a useful tool, but you can't use it to replace legislature. That's where the meat of the laws have to come from in the system of government that we have set up. We don't have the ability to run a referendum on everything, and we would kind of have to if we're going to use it as a tool on every election. And we can't. We have decided as a country that we're not going to simplify the process or make it easier to vote. So making voting less pleasant seems like a step in the wrong direction, but consistent with our American values.
Well, California went referenda crazy, and I think they regret it. So I think what you're saying is exercise with extreme caution the use of initiative and referendum. Okay, I want to thank this panel. You guys did a great job tonight in explaining your feelings and how you feel the country is moving forward. Dan, Merrick, Mike, appreciate your input. And to all those out there in Cyberland, we'll see you next time. Bye.